People will obviously only share their wins on social media. If you really get it right, you could make a lot of money, but odds are really good that you're going to be the exit liquidity.
What you need is for the market to punch you in the face. In my case, several times.
It looked so easy. I want to make as much money as fast as possible too.
Those early people who gave Ponzi money, they weren't lying. Look at all the money I'm making.
Buying is not hard. Selling is hard. Selling is really, 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 really hard.
You know what you're looking at here? You are looking at the original Bitcoin.
Either be completely passive, don't try to time the market, treat it like passive index fund investing, or go 100% all in.
Well, hello, everyone. It's Jim O'Shaughnessy with yet another Infinite Loops. I am very excited by today's guest. My guest today is Nat Eliason, the author of Crypto Confidential, Winning and Losing Millions in the New Frontier of Finance. Kirkus reviews already. Your book doesn't even come out until July, and yet you already have a Kirkus review calling your book an essential read for anyone playing or thinking of playing in the crypto sandbox. Nat, welcome.
Thank you so much, Jim. Yeah, that Kirkus review was amazing. I couldn't believe that came through already and was so positive. They can be pretty tough critics.
Very, very, very tough critics. And that's why I pay attention to them, because if they're saying something good about a book, I'll usually at least check it out. Right. Yeah. So when I saw that, I was like, now you had very kindly sent me the preprint of your book, which I read, which I loved, which I suggest everyone get a copy of when it's available in July.
Thank you.
And we were talking before we started the recording. One of the things that I love about the way you write this book, we have verticals in film and we have our own book publishing company. It's kind of still in stealth mode, although we're horrible at stealth, so everybody knows about it. But in reading the scripts and reading books, if you can engage your reader from the very first page, that's a really good sign that the book's going to be great. And I love how you did it. You did it with the line, Nat, someone found a way to hack us. It sounds bad. All our funds might be at risk. Like, how do you not keep reading?
Yeah, well, thank you. That was, crypto is this kind of like opaque and confusing and intimidating industry, especially from the outside. And I love the industry. I'm fascinated by it. I think it's so cool. And I really, really wanted to write something that could demystify some of it, could explain some of the things going on, could sort out the good and bad. And I decided pretty early on that the best way to do that would not be a Crypto 101, what is Bitcoin type book, because it's just such a narrower market. Whereas, and if it's a little drier, you have to force yourself through it. But if I could write something really, really fun and really fast paced that could almost be like a beach read, and then like sneak the crypto knowledge in along the way, that might actually achieve the goal of, getting more of this knowledge out there, but in this really, really fun package. So figuring out how to make it exciting like that was a huge focus throughout the process.
Yeah, and a great way to bring your reader into what for many is a very opaque topic, right?
Yeah.
Way back when my son decided to do a deep dive, he has the Invest Like the Best podcast, which I always call him the podcast king. I'm just one of the retainers. But he did a series on crypto. And I listened to it. And so that I was sitting with him, and this is way back in 2016 or 17. Oh, wow. And early. So I'm sitting with him and I'm like, all right, we got 30 minutes. Explain crypto to me. And he looks at me and he goes, I can't in 30 minutes.
Yes, it's really hard. You could maybe get through, like Bitcoin and some of the basics of the value prop with Bitcoin and potentially Ethereum, but It's hard. I mean, I've been writing about it for 2 years on this, and I still struggle to give pretty concise explanations for things.
Yeah, and he did actually use those 30 minutes to good effect. Well, let's set up our listeners and people watching. Your own story started when you learned that the first of your two daughters was on the way, and that you needed to make as much money as you possibly could within a 6-month time frame. From an old Wall Street hand, trying to make money really fast usually leads to despair. But
Usually leads to pain.
but if you don't mind, set up the story for our listeners.
Yeah, that time period I think was so wild and so special. And I think it's a time period that a lot of us are going to look back on with curiosity and interest, not just because crypto, but because it was the end of 2020 going into 2021. We were starting to come out of the pandemic. There was all of this uncertainty, but also excitement around being alive and coming out of this world. And there was all of these stimulus checks coming out, and the economy was starting to rip. And then on top of all of this, you have crypto just starting to go parabolic. It really began to take off in November, December of 2020, and started to hit mainstream awareness in early 2021. That's when Bitcoin was hitting new highs. Elon was on SNL talking about Dogecoin. You had all these big media events happening. Beeple sold his 5,000 days NFT for $69 million, right? It's just these wild, unimaginable events happening. And I'm in this funny position where, I felt like I needed to make as much money as quickly as possible. I was scared with having a kid coming, and I didn't know what life was going to look like on the other side of that. I wasn't really making an income, but I had savings I could fall back on. But obviously, those can only last for so long. And I had been learning programming because I thought, okay, I enjoy programming. It's fun. It can get me to a good income faster than writing can. And maybe I'll find a job there. And then I just keep seeing this crypto stuff hitting my social media feed, and people that I knew from other lives, like the entrepreneurial world, especially posting about NFTs and weird coins and all this money they're making. And I just couldn't ignore the allure. It looked so easy. It looked like everybody was making money. And I was just in that headspace of, I want to make as much money as fast as possible too. It seems like people are doing it in crypto. I'm going to go figure it out and try to make it happen.
And what's funny about that is the way a lot of bubbles get started. If you know your history, you share a lot of enthusiasm with a fellow named Isaac Newton, who lost his entire fortune in a scheme called the South Sea trading bubble.
Right.
And we're going to get to it a little bit later, because what's interesting is if you study these various schemes, bubbles, etc., where everybody gets whipped up and ridiculously enthusiastic. I myself lived through one with the bomb bubble, but they share a lot of characteristics. But before we go there, let's talk about kind of your first big moment, and you decide, okay, I'm a reasonably good programmer, and I could probably make some money in DeFi farming, but you didn't really like DeFi farming. Tell us why.
Yeah, so one of the things that I learned really quickly, and that I caution people about pretty aggressively, is people will obviously only share their wins on social media. It's pretty rare that they're sharing their losses. And so once you get into some of these really, really speculative manias in crypto or anywhere else, you find out that tons of people are also losing money. And even the people who appear to be making lots of money might actually be down, but they're just posting their wins. And back then, farming was kind of the big thing, which was, in the good version, it was getting paid some tokens from a project for participating in it and using it, exploring it, kind of like getting free Uber Eats credits for signing up for Uber Eats, right? That was the good version of it. And that version still exists. And it's, farming itself is not necessarily bad. But then there was the really casino-esque gambling version where a new project would get spun up. The more money you temporarily placed in it, the more tokens you got. The more of those tokens you redeposited, the even more tokens you got. It was like a multiplier effect. And so it kind of became this game of chicken of how long can we all hold these tokens in this thing so that the value of them runs up because nobody's selling. And then the first big person to sell starts the cascade downwards. Then everyone's selling and trying to get out as quickly as possible. And then the next day you move on to the next thing. And you would see these little crypto apps pop up specifically for this gambling farming activity. And overnight, they would have $100 million put into them, which was insane. And then 2 days later, there'd be less than 10 million in it, and the 100 million plus would be in some other app. And it was just moving around like crazy. But it became really clear that if you were not the person, if you were not one of the people in these secret, very well protected group chats or Discord groups where you knew something, where you knew it was going to launch as soon as it launched, so you could get in early before the price ran up, then you were basically what's called exit liquidity. You were the money that was coming in later as the price had run up, trying to get your share of the winnings, but you were buying from the people who got in really early. So you were giving them the money that allowed them to make money off of the whole game. And that's kind of like being the fish in poker or in these other things. It's not necessarily exactly like a Ponzi scheme. A lot of it is, but there's a lot of things you could analogize it to. And so what I learned pretty quickly was playing these speculation games. Then it was farming. Today it's meme coins, right? There's all these crazy meme coins coming out on like Solana. Maybe it'll be on Base in a few months. But playing those speculative games, if you really get it right, you could make a lot of money. But odds are really good that you're going to be the exit liquidity. And so the vast majority of people are losing money. They're seeing something on Twitter. They're getting excited. They're going in. They're throwing their money in. They're losing all of it. And then they're going home. And so I didn't want to play that game anymore. I didn't want to play a game where I had a chance of significant loss. I only wanted to do things where if I lost, it would be a small loss. And if I won, it could be a really big win. And so that's what kind of eventually drove me away from some of the really speculative stuff and more onto the let's actually try to help build something real here, because that's where the real long-term opportunity is. And I mean, that's true in basically any industry.
As one who spent his entire career, for the most part, in asset management and love history, as I was reading your book, it was just like I was making notes on the Kindle, but I also had a notebook in front of me, because it just shared so many similarities with things that have already happened, right?
Yeah.
I think it was Cicero who said, if you are ignorant of what happened before you were born, you are destined to remain forever a child. And in the early part of the 20th century, there was a very similar thing on Wall Street, which was called investment pools. And what they would do is exactly what they did with the pump and dump in crypto. They would accumulate huge positions in stocks. Then they would start broadcasting that this stock was going to the moon. And everybody on Wall Street and everybody in the bucket shops became their exit liquidity. So what's really interesting, same sort of thing in most of these schemes, where they get in the case of Wall Street, they get in with big positions in these stocks. By the way, many of the stocks they got into were highly illiquid. Another feature,
another big topic,
another feature that maps pretty well over to crypto. But then they would, Joseph Kennedy, who was also a bootlegger, was also a very well-known operator of stock pools. And in fact, the behavior of the stock pools is what gave us the SEC. So what's really interesting is this sort of pattern happens over and over and over again. People notice, like the SEC, et cetera. And then the regulation comes in oftentimes as a result of all the misadventures of what had gone on previously. But one of the things that I find interesting about your book as well is you did feel a real strong social pressure, even though you were in some of those private chat rooms. You felt a very, very strong social pressure not to sell. Without the benefit of hindsight bias or analysis here, did you kind of know that, wait a minute, are these guys trying to make me their exit liquidity?
That was sort of the unfortunate reality of having such a transparent financial world, because you could work on a project, you could be an employee, you could be a founder, and you could get paid in that project's tokens and not get paid any other way. But if people knew that that was your wallet, your crypto wallet, that all those tokens were yours, and then they saw you selling, they could get really upset. And this became an increasingly big problem as I stayed in crypto longer, because most people knew which wallet was mine. And so they would see sells of the token of the project I was working with. And then they would, they would message me, or they would message other people on the team, and they would say, what's he doing? Like, what does he know? What's going on? And it created these awful incentives, because if you're just getting paid in the project's token, you have to sell it. You can't pay your mortgage with Doge or with most of these things, especially these new tokens for these new products that are just launched. So you have to cash it out eventually. But the minute you do, everyone sees it, or not everyone, a lot of people see it as a lack of faith in the project. You're a scammer. There's something that they don't. It's these really, really challenging incentives. And I didn't get to include this in the book, but I talked with a number of friends who worked in the industry during that period who were up millions of dollars on paper. But they were so afraid of the social backlash of selling any of their tokens that they didn't sell them, and basically rode them back down to zero because of that pressure. And I got kind of stuck in that, and I wasn't sure what to do. And the thing that I ended up settling on was actually partially based on SEC insider trading laws, which was CEOs and senior executives of public companies have to sell on a schedule, right? It has to be kind of predictable when they're going to sell so that they can't act on inside information. And so I created this rule for myself that I'm going to sell basically a set amount each day, and that percentage might change every couple of weeks or months or something, but every day at around the same time, I would just sell that amount so that it would be very predictable personally and publicly. And that seemed like the best way to balance it. But even that, turned into all this mess with people getting really pissed at me. And there just wasn't a good answer. You either wrote it all down to zero, you sold it and had people be mad at you, or you were anonymous. And this is honestly why I think a lot of people are anonymous or pseudonymous in crypto, is if you start one of these big projects and it takes off, you might suddenly be sitting on tens of millions of dollars. And if they know who it is that has those tokens and exactly where they are, they will watch them. I had one friend who was an NFT trader, and there were these Discord chats that had automated alerts set up for everything he did. And so if he bought something, they all got notifications on their phones that this guy had bought something. If he sold, they would get notifications that he had sold. And then there would be even more technical people who would try to front run transactions from these really influential people. It's really crazy the social incentives you get into when your whole financial life is public like that.
Yeah, there's a great handbook by a guy by the name of Cialdini called Influence.
Yeah,
and
wonderful book.
He highlights all of the methods which make it very, very difficult for people not to comply. Reciprocity is one of the strongest. Like, if I do something for you, you feel overwhelmingly, unless you're a psychopath or sociopath, that you need to do something for me as well. It's baked into our human OS. But also, this whole idea of what I think Scott Adams, the cartoonist, calls linguistic kill shots. And that is this idea of you either have diamond hands or paper hands.
Yeah.
Did you experience a lot of that?
That meme, I went into crypto much more on we all gotta have diamond hands, just hold this forever, because if we all hold, it'll keep going up. And that mentality was so baked into, like you said, the operating system of most people in the space. And the longer I spent in it, the more I realized that mentality is almost like it's a way to get other people to be your exit liquidity, because the way to have the best outcome is to portray yourself as having diamond hands. The we're all in this together, we're all going to hold until the moon, so that everybody else gets convinced of it, so that none of them sell, so that you can sell. And obviously, that's maybe a more cynical and negative version of it, but it's kind of like the game theory way you have to think about it, which is that these big influential people who are telling everyone to just keep holding, just keep holding, just keep holding, they might be saying that so that they can sell and you end up being the one holding the bag. And this idea that paper hands, somebody who sells, is like a, weak, feeble-minded quitter, somebody who should be disgraced and then embarrassed for their actions. Like, no, that's probably the smart thing to do. If you bought something for $1,000 and now it's worth $50,000, you're not stupid for selling that. That's probably a really good decision. But there were so many cases of this, of just, and myself included, being committed to that idea and just watching something run way up and then run all the way back down. And honestly, that was a little bit of what I wanted to capture in this too, because as I talked to other people who were really involved in crypto during that period, a lot of people have these stories, and a lot of people experienced getting into something at the right time, seeing it go up a crazy amount, and then riding it all the way back down. And there's a lot of shame and embarrassment that comes with that, especially if you, like I did, told your partner at one point, hey, we're up $100,000 on this. This is amazing. And then they go, oh, great. And then 2 months later, they say, hey, where did that $100,000 go? And you have to say, well, it wasn't $100,000 in our bank account. And it's a pretty painful thing. And I know it, especially in relationships, led to a lot of drama during that period, myself included. And I think it's important for people to be honest about some of the psychological games that could be happening with those memes when they get, when they really, really start to spread and really, really start to take hold.
Yeah, there are things called patterns, which are the elemental pattern of things that might look very, very different, but are really the same. And so an pattern for this type of speculative boom and bust is very mimetic, right? So we copy other people. It's in the source code of our DNA. We have mirror neurons, we were meant to. Because copying other people is a really great way to learn how to do things fast, right? Well, just think of the child who watches mom and dad doing this, this, and this, and they copy them. And that helps them learn really quickly. But it involves a part of our psychology that is very easy to hijack. Yeah. And the way you can hijack it, much like those guys who ran the pools, much like people saying, you've got paper hands, is it involves the emotional side of our nature vastly more than it does the more analytical side. But there's an old saying on Wall Street, and it happened to me in options trading, that the worst thing that can happen to a novice investor was for them to make a big amount of money on their first trade. Because that
you've got it all figured out now. You're a genius.
You are Wile E. Coyote genius.
Yep.
And having experienced it, I can tell you the feelings that engenders are so difficult to overcome.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, what did Mike Tyson say? Everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face. What you need is for the market to punch you in the face. In my case, several times, and indeed in yours, because you did have a moment of clarity where you were like, "This is fucking crazy.
Yeah.
I've gotta get out." But then back to Newton, he did the same. If you know the history, because everyone else was buying the South Sea, Newton bought it himself, and he sold when it was here. Listeners are not going to see I'm doing a parabolic up with my hand.
Yeah.
It sold here, and then it kept going up. And then what does that engender? I've made a mistake. I was wrong. And he jumped back in with the conviction, come hell or high water, I'm hanging out of this stock. And I used to make a joke that during that time, pre-internet, obviously, but poems were really popular then. And there was actually a poem about the South Sea Trading Company that went, fill the South Sea goblet full, the gods shall of our stock take care. Europa pleased accepts the bowl, and Jove with joy puts off the bear. And now I was a quant when I was an asset manager. And so I used to use that as the joke to say, I'm a quant, but anytime somebody writes a poem about a stock I hold, I'm selling. It doesn't matter.
Yeah. That's another great history repeating itself example. Like I think about this a lot now, where there were these little, looking back, the best signs about when to get out were all little social things. They were never the number itself. They were behavior based, right? Like writing a poem. I texted somebody this the other day because I'm sure you saw the photo of Jensen Huang, the NVIDIA CEO, signing the woman's chest at the conference. And I texted that photo to someone and I said, this is where you sell. And, I'm betting against NVIDIA by saying that, and we'll see how that comment airs. But I was just thinking back to crypto, and it was always when people started behaving in these really ridiculous ways, or something had gone completely, or there's something really, really strange and uncharacteristic had happened. When it was in all the news, or all the celebrities were buying Bored Apes, or Elon on SNL talking about Dogecoin. It was always those kinds of things that were the sign that we had hit peak speculation, right? Morgan Housel has that wonderful quotation from Psychology of Money where he says the sign you're in a bubble is when most of the buyers are buying for speculation instead of long-term investment. It's something to that effect. And I think you do see that best in the behavior of people more than the actual numbers or the actual quantitative aspects. But it was so hard to believe it at the time because I was so wrapped up in it too. Like you said, I was just like Newton. I would have these wins, and then I would get out of something, and then it would keep going up, and I would get back in with even more, right? And whatever I made, I ended up in almost every case, except for a couple of big ones, I ended up losing most of what I put in, even if it went way up, because I would do that same thing. I would just get sucked up. I would ignore the social signs that something was weird here and double down and then lose what I had made. And that happened to a lot of people who you think made a lot of money in crypto during that period. You saw these Twitter posts. I can't name names, but you would see these Twitter posts and things about these huge wins. And then I would talk to them months later, and they'd say, "Oh yeah, I made that amount there, but then I put that amount times 2 into this other thing, and then that just went down to 0. So it ended up being a wash." And those are the stories that don't get out quite as much.
No, and I think that's a great part of your book, educating people along those lines. I am fascinated by it because the pull on your emotions, which I experienced. So I'll give you an example. In April of 1999, the dot-com bubble was going full swing. I wrote a piece for my then company, O'Shaughnessy Capital Management, that said, the internet contrarian.
Okay.
And in the piece, I go through all of the reasons why this is the biggest bubble any of us currently investing have ever experienced. 80% of these companies are going to be carried out of here feet first. They're going to go bankrupt. And then what did I do, Nat? What do you think I did next?
You put a bunch of money into internet stocks.
No, even worse. I started an internet company.
I don't know. Maybe that's better, right?
But what's fascinating about it is like my entire investment process was completely empirically derived, quantitative algorithmic investing for longer periods of time, right? But it was basically, I was pure Vulcan, right? It was like, don't tell me stories. We're only going to look at the numbers.
Yeah.
But then when you actually experience the emotional pull of something like that, that's where, because I had that experience and I started seeing it again in crypto, previous to that in the whole CDO madness that caused the great financial downturn. It's very difficult to extract yourself from those emotions, especially in your case. A couple of things happened where, like, I don't even know how you managed to get where you got in terms of being able to pull the trigger and sell. So, for example, you bought a Bored Ape for like $7,500. And unlike many, many other people, you actually sold it for about 198,000 US dollars. And then you also had an experience where you bought some you saw DeFi 2.0 and you bought, I guess it was Luna. Was that? Yeah. And you made
Luna.
like, you made like 60 grand in a day. What people don't understand is when that is happening to you in real time, you become just absolutely tunnel visioned, and you're like, oh my God, I'm going to be a billionaire.
I'm a genius.
I'm a genius. And one of the things that I learned through getting punched in the face a lot of times by the market was any active manager, and it doesn't really matter, by the way, what you're trading. Any active manager follows a sine wave, and it goes from hero genius, goat idiot, hero genius, goat idiot. And once you bake that into your process, there are a lot. I mean, like literally, I had built in all sorts of things to keep my emotions at bay. But as I was watching the whole crypto thing unfold and the NFT thing unfold, I just kept thinking, oh my God, like this is just so close to every bubble I've ever studied. Lots of people are gonna like lose a lot of money here.
Yeah.
But let's I mean, like in hindsight, everybody knows that, right? Or most people know that. But there are some reasonably good real projects going on in crypto and Ethereum, et cetera. And one of the things that I find really interesting is crypto isn't dead. The United States government, which usually at the federal level gets what it wants, has tried to kill crypto in a variety of ways. They haven't come right out like FDR when he banned gold and he literally sent treasury agents to people's homes to take the gold away from them. So it has kind of an anti-fragile nature. Talk a bit about why that part of crypto, everybody like this human drama is really, really fascinating. But underneath it is, well, like underneath the stock pools, guess what? Yeah. They gave rise to mutual funds which were trying to pump and dump, right? And which train people, wow, maybe if I just keep putting my little bit of money in every month and just hold it, I could save for my retirement. And, it created a massive industry. what parts do you find that are still really compelling from just a use case point of view?
Totally. And yeah, I felt like this was so important to talk about and to highlight too, because it's like you said, there's a lot of dog shit in crypto. Like by number of tokens, probably 99% of them are just copycats or really short-term things, or don't really need to be there. But then you do have this core of very legitimate, very fascinating financial tools that I feel like I can pretty confidently say are going to be a significant part of the world economy moving forward, even if it's just a couple of them, right? And Bitcoin obviously has really, really crossed over here, where we have the ETF now. You have BlackRock saying they want to own 15% of all Bitcoin. You have you can put it in your retirement account. You have these companies putting it as part of their treasury. It has actually succeeded at creating a digital analog for gold. And I think the technical properties of it that allow for that are wonderful. We can't totally get into them here, but the fixed quantity, the decreasing inflation rate, the very, very fast global transmittability, it really makes it this wonderful tool for being an international store of wealth, almost like an improved gold. And that story alone has carried a lot of crypto through these booms and busts. And that it's one of those things where gold, you have some of these other uses, right? It's a wonderful conductor. You can use it in jewelry. But a lot of it is still mimetic, right? We all agreed that this rock is valuable. And because we all agree that this rock is valuable, this rock is valuable. And you could say that about any rock or anything with a finite quantity. And people said it about Bitcoin. And just as more and more people agreed on it and started to treat it that way, it sort of became true. It willed itself into effectiveness. And I think that, the US was kind of stuck in this challenging position of, the SEC doesn't want people to get scammed. And that's a really important job. And the US doesn't want to lose its status as a global reserve currency, as the thing that people do business in. But I think that as Bitcoin in particular has caught on, and we're really seeing this in Congress in the last few weeks, especially, there's been this really quick change of we should actually welcome this, because a lot of innovation is going to happen here in finance and in technology. It's going to happen all over the world because it's a global phenomenon, especially in places that are subject to high inflation and whatnot. And so we should welcome this and try to focus on, supporting the good parts of it, because a global, easily transmittable store of value is actually a wonderful thing for the world economy, right? Like, so much of innovation has happened by making money easier to transmit between people, easier to verify. It's good for everybody if we have more trade, if we can move money around easier. And then you've got the Ethereum story, which was kind of like the next big thing after Bitcoin, where I heard this wonderful analogy from the Bankless guys recently, where you could think of Bitcoin as a giant spreadsheet where you can track where every single the Bitcoin and fraction of Bitcoin is. You can track every person on the network, and you can say who has what. And with basically 100% certainty that it's always going to be accurate and it's not going to be cheatable. So you've got this like wonderful spreadsheet, but it's a simple spreadsheet. And that's a good thing for Bitcoin. We don't want it to be complicated. We want to know who has how much, and that's it. And then Ethereum said, okay, we're going to take that spreadsheet and now we're going to add macros. We're going to add code. We're going to say, it's not just that you can send your tokens, your coins between each other, your ETH or whatever else, but we can also do automated things with it. And so now you have this opportunity to rebuild the modern financial system on a internet first tech layer, instead of what we have in the US right now, which is kind of this pretty old system, right? Like, a lot of it came up from paper ledgers and it's been adjusted as we go. And you've got holdovers from that, like having wire transfer fees and ACH delays, not to mention credit card processing fees and kind of like slowness. Whereas kind of starting from scratch, rebuilding the financial layer on something like Ethereum allows you to have instant, fast, free payments all over the world in effectively US dollars, or getting your paycheck every minute instead of every 2 weeks. Being able to instantly borrow against your assets without having to go through hours of paperwork and deal with lawyers and banks and all of these things. And it's going to take a long time before that becomes mainstream, but it's already really quite impressive how useful it can be. I'll tell one story. I had this ridiculous event happen last fall where Austin has kind of crazy weather storms sometimes. And we had a 1 in 100 year hailstorm that happened last fall. And both of my cars were parked outside and they both got totaled. So I wake up the next morning, I hear the hail coming down. It sounds like we're in a tornado or something. It was actually really scary because we have a tin roof to a metal roof. And so it sounds like we're being bombarded. And then I go out the next morning, both of the windshields on both of my cars are destroyed. They're full of water. There's glass. Like both of my children's car seats are full of glass, right? It's just awful. And then I'm having to deal with insurance, which is a 3-month process to get the money I needed to fully replace these cars. So we're dealing with rentals and all this nonsense. And we finally get to the finish line where we're going to get the check for the car, but it's getting delayed. They're having issues on State Farm's end. I'm waiting and I'm waiting and I'm waiting. And I'm just sick of paying rental fees that I shouldn't be having to pay because of their delays. And so literally in 10 minutes, I went to my Ethereum wallet. I borrowed like $25,000 or something against my Ethereum. It was in my Chase bank account an hour later. I went to the dealership. I got the new car. And then once the State Farm money came through, I just repaid it. And that ability to just really quickly borrow against your assets for effectively no fee, no bank paperwork. I didn't have to go set up a HELOC or a portfolio line of credit or anything like that. That's really cool. And that's something that's available to everyone in the world 24/7 that was not possible 5 years ago. And obviously there's a lot of bad things that can happen if you can instantly leverage your assets to go do silly stuff with it. But the ability to kind of subvert or, skip parts of the current banking system is really, really cool, especially if you don't live in the US and you're subject to, concerning banking practices. Your money might disappear or you have hyperinflation. The fact that you can just take your paycheck, turn it into USDC, which is fully backed by US dollars, and then have it in one of these crypto native savings accounts where you're earning the treasury rate, even though you live in a small town in Nigeria, is incredible. Like, that's so cool. that wasn't possible 5 years ago. And I think that a lot of people in the US at government level woke up and said, this is actually the best thing in the world for the American economy and the US dollar, because it's still what people want to denominate in. And they're going to do it using this new tech because they can't access our banking system internationally. But this opens it up to everybody in the world to have the same protections and stability that we all get to enjoy living here. I mean, that alone is so amazing without getting into, what could happen with NFTs and what could happen with other DeFi stuff. Like, those things are amazing and are only getting cooler and cooler as time goes on.
Yeah. An interesting thing about innovations is that a lot of people swarm to them. It doesn't have to be financial necessarily. For example, at the turn of the 20th century, there were more than 200 automobile manufacturers in the United States. And everybody was trying a different way to do it. And then we ended up with 2. I guess we got 1 now.
Yeah.
But I've always kind of thought of money as both a technology and an information system, basically. And if you think about money that way, it is brilliant, right? To have a way to conveniently trade a slip of paper or a code of digits or whatever for something that you want, right? It's a means of getting it's an advanced form of barter, really.
Yeah.
We don't have to meet face to face. I don't have to see Nat. I'll give you these 3 chickens for those 3 books behind you, and it makes economies much, much more efficient. And part of the hack is you've got to get consensus reality on board. And by that I mean, if like you have maybe a core group of innovative thinkers and everything, and they're like, we've got this really great idea. And then consensus, everyone else is kind of like, I think those guys are really fucking crazy over there.
Yeah.
It's hard, right? But it seeps into consensus reality. And that is when you reach the tipping point, right? And the tipping point, in my opinion, is when you see people doing exactly what you said, switching it out, using it as a means of effecting an economic transfer. And I think that one of the things that tripped people up in crypto was currencies are supposed to have or supposed to be a store of value, right? So like I have $10,000 and that is that's latent energy over here, right? And if it changes too much, if it was 10,000 today and is 2,000 tomorrow and 20,000 the next day, that's not going to be a great means of exchange.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I would do if I was a crypto guy, I would be quite willing to separate the use cases and say, hey, great speculative vehicle over here on the one hand, but also then go into what you said about the people transferring that don't have access to their financials if they're outside of the U.S. Do what you did, but is that happening? Are people trying to? Yeah,
that I mean, that's actually that's such an important point because it shows what has been a really wonderful evolution in the crypto story. Because if you read the original Bitcoin white paper, the title is actually like Bitcoin, an electronic peer-to-peer payment system. It's something like that, where the original stated goal of Bitcoin was to replace dollars or was to be like digital currency. And you said something really interesting there where you said a currency is supposed to be a store of value. And I think some people would disagree with that because some would say, no, you want a hard money like gold to be your store of value or land or something like that. And then currency is like a temporary means of exchange, but it maybe shouldn't be the thing that you keep as your store of value because it could be inflated away because of these other concerns. And then, with Bitcoin, Bitcoin couldn't be a store of value because it was crazy volatile, right? You don't want to put your savings into something at $60,000 and then watch it go down to 12. That's not going to feel very good. And so, yeah, as Bitcoin has had these runs up and Ethereum has had these runs, we've had the emergence of this other asset, stablecoins, which are, crypto tokens that are pegged to $1, usually, in the best case, in a bank account somewhere. And that separation has been fantastic because if you're actually paying for things day to day, you don't want to use Bitcoin. It's going to be slower. It's going to be more expensive. You're going to have the volatility. Like that's the long-term savings. But now you have this new thing, this USDC that's pegged to the dollar. It's always going to be $1. And then you can do all of your payments with that and not have to touch your safe long-term Bitcoin. And while Bitcoin is definitely not a great store of value in the way land or gold might be right now, because those things have much more predictable, or not predictable, but more contained volatility, Bitcoin is trending towards less volatility as it gains adoption. It sort of has this logarithmic curve of how the price is settling out, and the volatility with each cycle has tightened. The amount that it goes up has decreased, the amount that it goes down has like somewhat decreased. And so it's coming into this tighter curve where you could imagine that in 50 years, it has something closer to gold's stability. We're just not there yet, right? And so I do think it's a really long term for it to get to that point. But in the meantime, you do have this thing. You do have these stable coins that can let you have the benefits of currency without all of that crazy volatility. And the thing that's amazing about stable coins, just going into kind of the power of this new financial layer is, I suspect that in 3 to 5 years, there will be a lot of places where you can do Apple Pay using stable coins from your Coinbase wallet, the way you can do it with your credit card right now. And within my Coinbase wallet, within about 10 seconds, I can swap my USDC for a treasury-based stablecoin. And then I'm getting the treasury yield in my checking account without having to transfer between, different bank accounts and things like that. And that's a really cool, new way for me to use my money and to also protect against some amount of inflation. And again, for everyone in the world to use it. And that's really neat. And so I think that crypto is doing a good job of growing and saying, okay, this is still kind of a speculative asset. It's not at the stability point where it's a great store of wealth. It'll probably get there eventually. But in the meantime, if you do want something more reliable, you have this other asset over here. Of course, then you have to be careful that you don't put your money in the wrong stable coin, because we've seen those blow up catastrophically. And that was really the worst outcome, I think, of the last mania. So that's going to need growth too. But the underlying tech and idea is really solid and is going to, I think, become a bigger and bigger part of the economy going forward.
One of the interesting things about most innovations that technology conforms to really beautifully in the graph, the S-curve, right?
Mm-hmm.
The value of a single telephone is basically worthless unless it's smartphone and I can play games on it,
Yeah.
right? If I have a telephone and you have a telephone, more useful, but very limited in its use. If we're best of friends and I want to talk to Nat every day, 5 times a day, that's going to add to my value. But where these become really, really interesting is when everybody has one and you can communicate with anyone that you want to who will take your call. In much the same way, the crypto use cases are contingent upon adoption by the maybe sometimes slower adopters in the world.
Yeah.
So, for example, the reason the internet really got adopted much more quickly than it might have otherwise was because of Pez dispensers. What? Basically, back in the late 90s, the guy who started eBay wanted to sell new collected Pez dispensers. And so he started selling them there. But then that attracted people who were kind of like, oh, I'm interested in buying collectibles and things like that. And then a little phenomenon called Beanie Babies came along.
Mm-hmm.
I have a daughter who was the right age for Beanie Babies. I have a photo of her just decked out. She's lying on the floor and she's swathed in all of her Beanie Babies. And the way that people were transacting was via the internet. And so the great majority of people who still didn't trust the internet, right? They would say, well, I'll call you with my credit card number. Don't put your credit card number on the internet, right?
Yep.
Just basically we're like, fuck it. I'm just going to put the number on the internet. But the underlying point that was interesting was that moved a huge number of people into trusting the internet. And, it went from there, right? Because it had gained the trust of a majority of people. The challenge that you face, of course, is you've got a very vocal, let's hope they're a minority, but a very vocal group that are saying incredible things, right? Magic money. It's USD. I'd never take USD. I used to, at the height of some of these bubbles, when people would say USD is a fiat currency, I would never take it. I would always joke, well, you do know that United States dollar is backed by the most powerful military the world has ever created that takes its marching orders from politicians that show repeatedly their willingness to use it. And then I found this GIF of U.S. soldiers during World War II demobbing, right? And they're all there's thousands of these guys marching off the ship. And I said, let me send some of my boys by to pick up that fiat worthless currency.
Yeah.
But that's the aspect. You can make a joke, right? But there is some truth behind that joke, which is the idea that there are a lot of intangibles that make, say, the United States dollar the world's reserve currency, right?
Mhm.
And they're based on trust, they're based on ubiquity, they're based on things that people don't think a lot about sometimes, in that what is called the shadow economy, what we used to call black markets. Black markets are about a third of the total GDP of the world. And guess
Believe
what
that.
black markets are priced in?
Dollars.
USD.
Yeah.
Yes. And so I used to joke to people that younger people, I would hold up, and for those listening, I'm holding up $100 bill here. And I would say, you know what you're looking at here? You are looking at the original Bitcoin. You can't trace it. Nobody can find you when you use it. So cash. The other aspect of your book that I really loved is like you tell some great stories about some very, very colorful people.
Thanks.
Share a few of the ones that have been getting the best response. I don't want to steal your thunder by suggesting the ones that I loved, but give us a couple of the stories behind, because you met some really interesting, or actually you interacted with some really interesting people who you never actually met in real life.
Yeah. Well, that was the first thing that was pretty crazy about this was after after I felt like speculating was not the way to make it during that period, and I wanted to get into programming, and so I started learning how to program things to build on Ethereum, and I wanted to help teams launch their tokens, and basically the thing that got me really into it was gaming, because like you said, this technology can be amazing, but if nobody's actually using it for anything, right, then it's never going to be adopted. And I've heard this, you would know better than me, but I've heard this as one of the problems with the first internet bubble was that you had these websites like Webvan and Pets.com that ended up later becoming huge companies, right? Now we have Instacart and we have Chewy, but the problem back in 2000 was nobody wanted to put their credit card into a browser. And so those companies never did well. It took 15 years for that idea to fully play out. And one of the things that made me buy into crypto and made me buy into a lot of the potential was that I had fortunately seen people already spending large amounts of money on digital things and moving large amounts of money around digitally through video games. And so I wanted to work with a video game company because it seemed so obvious to me that there will be a game in our lifetime, probably within the next 10 years, that people spend a lot of time in, where they do work for other players of the game. And this could be anything from, selling items that you found to even like digital therapy sessions in a virtual environment, right? That you receive payment for, that you then want to convert back to fiat, back to dollars, right? Because again, like we do still run on dollars. That's how you pay for things in the real world still. And even a stable coin is pegged to the dollar, right? That's the money. But there needed to be a good way to get the value of your work out of these games, and crypto was the obvious way to do it. And so, I started learning programming and I started trying to find a game to work with. And the one that ended up hiring me, I didn't know any of their names. They were all pseudonyms. I didn't know what they looked like. I had never talked to them on the phone. I had no background on them except that they had some influence in the crypto community. But I was brand new. I had no proof that I knew what I was doing, and they were willing to give me a chance to help do the coding for them. And so I said, yep, screw it. Like, I hope you guys are trustworthy, because you never know. I've heard this happen to other people where they get in a similar situation, and then it turns out the people who hired them were using them to run a scam. And that was totally possible. They could have just been taking advantage of me so that they could run off with everyone's money. But it was kind of a risk I had to take because I didn't have any other great employment options at the time. So, that side of it, I think, was fascinating. Of you could actually build something. And the token that I launched with them at one point in the most generous interpretation was worth over $1 billion, right? Which was absurd. And not real for many reasons we can get into, but it went from, nothing silly project that I'm just helping out on for experience to, oh my God, this thing is worth over $1 billion. And with never meeting them in person. Or even getting on a phone call through that whole launch process, just purely chat messages with anonymous figures. So that side of it is crazy. And then there was this whole other side of it of later on, the game is doing well and it's growing and they're getting a lot of interest and they end up raising an investment round. And one of the investors turns out to be Three Arrows Capital, which a lot of people know from that period because they were one of the big blowups. They were one of the big implosions like SBF. And the founders are, last I checked, still on the run, like hiding in Dubai. There's warrants out for their arrest because they were borrowing money on the same collateral from a bunch of different people. And so when Three Arrows blew up, they couldn't pay back any of their debts and they caused this crazy cascade of crashes. But they invested in the game and I was so hyped up. I was so excited. I was like, "Oh my God, this is the validation. This is going to the moon now." And this was what really broke the spell for me with some of these big influencers and really caused me to lose a lot of my trust in the people who were most aggressively proselytizing the space. Is somebody else tipped me off to the fact that Three Arrows was basically insider trading on their own investment. They had made this investment in the game and they knew when the news was going to come out about their investment. And so they had bought up all of these tokens on the public market, over $1 million of tokens on the public market leading into it. And I assumed because they knew that as the news came out, there would be this big pop and the token would take off and then they could probably dump everything that they had bought publicly on everybody who followed them into the investment. And, I won't spoil what happened from that for anyone who wants to read the book. But that was when I was like, man, it's just brutal sharks all the way down. And you know what? Some regulation is good. Like insider trading laws are a good thing. There should be rules against this because I knew that that's what they were doing, but I found out kind of late and most people had no idea. They just saw the token going up. They saw the news coming out. They all got excited. They wanted to get in on the action and they had no idea that the investors who were leading this were sort of they were chumming the water, right? They were going to make money on it no matter what. And that was a kind of a tough thing to wake up to. Obviously, not all VCs are like that. There are wonderful VCs in crypto, right? Really, really amazing people who are making the space great. And again, there are a lot of people who are just trying to get as rich as possible at any expense necessary. And you've really got to know what game you're playing if you're going to get into that arena. There's there's a bunch of other stories like that as the narrative goes.
The other thing that you talk a lot about, which I found fascinating, was the whole part of, again, this is all just hitting our base code of human OS, the idea of status, right?
Mm-hmm.
With NFTs buying you digital status, but potentially that status not transferring over to the real world. And yet we still, because we're humans, right? And that's our base code, we still kind of think of it the same way. It still drops the dopamine. It still does all of those similar things. So if you were sitting down right now, somebody read your book, Crypto Confidential, and they got in touch with you and said, Nat, loved the book. I'm excited about some of these genuine use cases that seem to be very real. What would be your guide? You're their uncle who's taking them aside. Yeah. What would you be telling them? Like, would it be back to the story you just told? Listen, if the CTO names himself Excalibur and he's got a picture of a sword, that might be a tell.
But it also might be fun. Excalibur wasn't a bad guy.
Yeah. So what would you tell them? Here's what you got to watch out for. If you see this, and this, steer clear.
Honestly, what I tell pretty much everyone is you have a choice. You either go all in, you quit your job, you spend all day in Discord and Telegram and Twitter, you work with a crypto company, you allocate a certain amount of money to investing in new things coming out, and you make it your life. If you do that, there's a good chance that you could make a lot of money by getting in on the ground floor of something, being really involved, really understanding the energy of the market and whether we're in a speculative mania or not. I mean, that still might not be enough to save you. You might get too convinced and hold it too long. That's what happened to Three Arrows, right? They thought that it was going up forever, but that's your shot to actually be, the beta of the crypto market. If you're not willing to do that, if you're not willing to go 100% all in, just go to Coinbase, set up an automatic weekly buy of like Bitcoin and Ethereum and maybe Solana if you want to be a little spicy, and then don't look at it. Just treat it like passive index fund investing. And you just let that run for a while. If you hit a point where you need to rebalance because now suddenly 10% of your portfolio is in crypto and that feels too high, then you can sell some and rebalance that way. But either be completely passive, don't try to time the market, just do automated buys, or go 100% all in. Because where I see people almost always lose money is they have their normal job, they have their normal life, and then they're trying to do a little bit of day trading on the side. And if you're doing that, you're the extra liquidity because you are not clued in enough to know when to get out. And the thing too is buying is not the hard thing. It's actually pretty easy to look at the trends and say, okay, this is happening. I should buy something because the mania is starting to take off. People are starting to talk about it in the news again. This is a great time to get in. Buying is not hard. Selling is hard. Selling is really, 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 really hard. And you will almost 100% either get scared in a week and just sell it and then be kicking yourself and be stuck in that indecision for months or years, or you will hold it all the way up and all the way back down. And you just don't want to be in that situation. So, there are amazing teams building really, really cool things. And there is a lot of potential in that industry. It's a lot like getting into working at an internet company, maybe in 2003 or 2007 or 2010, right? Earlier days on this stuff. And that, if it's exciting to you, like go do that. But if you're not going to go that all in, don't even play, right? Like maybe give yourself $100 to monkey around with to scratch the itch, but do not put serious money on the line because it's all going to get taken from you.
You also have a good method for helping you sell that you talk about in the book, and that's the imagining the money pile. Talk a little bit about imagining the money pile.
This saved my ass so much. This thought exercise is the only reason that I didn't lose like everything that I put into crypto, because when you buy something for $1,000 and now it's worth $50,000, you're not thinking, oh my God, I made $50,000. You're thinking, I'm going to make another $50,000. You're thinking it's going to 100. It's going to keep going up. And the question I started asking myself was, okay, pretend I don't own any of this. Pretend I don't have any of these tokens. Forget about what I bought them for, all of that. Just try to really get into that headspace and imagine I have all of that money in cash in my living room. It's in, fat stacks of $100 bills. It's like the Walter White scene in the storage unit where he's like swimming on the pile of money, right? I guess that's his bodyguard who's doing it. But, try to imagine that and then ask yourself, if I had all of that money in my living room, would I then take it and put it into Dogecoin? Would I put it into this video game currency? Would I put it into this Bored Ape? And it'll probably be no. that looking at it that way, you'll probably go, actually, I'd like to have some of that in my savings account. It'd be cool to be getting 5% on that. This is great. I would not throw all of this back on the table. And just doing that is so powerful for trying to shortcut that like loss aversion, that sunk cost, that belief that it's going to keep going up, because selling is hard. It feels like you're missing out on these gains. But if you imagine having to buy in again, that might be what saves you, and is what ended up saving me. It was that and one other exercise from Nick Majuli, actually, of just having target net worth allocations based on asset class. And I hadn't done that in a year. And then I did it and realized that 70% of my family's net worth was in crypto. And we had a young kid and a mortgage and all this. And
Whoopsie.
yeah, I mean, I shit you not. I was like, well, maybe 70% is okay, right? Like it's not 100%. I know a lot of people who are at 99%. I'm not that bad, but I was like, no, this is stupid. I got to get that down to at least 50 because it should at least be less than half. And those two combined were really, really, really powerful and allow you to be okay selling at any price without trying to time the market. Because if you don't think about it that way, then you will pretty quickly talk yourself into, oh, I'll just wait a week, or maybe this will go up a little bit, another 10%, and then I'll sell. And that's when you start to get in real trouble.
Yeah, and the emotions are running the show then, and it's like the clip from Star Wars where he's shouting, "More!"
Yeah, more. So true. And the thing too is like, if you're that in crypto, all of your friends are in crypto, and you're in Discord all day with them. You're into Telegram all day. All of you have fully drank the Kool-Aid. And this cycle, because crypto's starting to take off again, it's starting to get exciting again. Things are happening, and I've removed Discord and Telegram from my phone. I unfollowed almost everybody on Twitter. I removed the price tracking apps. I can't let myself look at it. I can't let the noise in, because I know if it gets in, I will convince myself that I learned a lot last time. If I go back in again, I could do it even bigger this time. And that again is really where you get screwed up and lose everything. So you kind of have to be willing to, like you said, turn off all the noise, remove yourself from it so that you can try to stay at least a little bit more objective about what you're doing.
Yeah, that's another one. We talked about patterns earlier.
Mm-hmm.
If you, for example, you want to understand the way that the best way to suck money out of people, walk in to a casino and don't bet anything. Just walk around and observe everything that's going on. Right? Are there windows? Are there clocks? Are there free drinks? Are there slot machines near the entrance that make a lot of noise when people win?
Yeah.
Now, why do the ones near the entrance seem to pay out much more often than the ones deep in the bowels of the casino? Like, these guys are literally Jedi master of the mind tricks of sucking money out of people. And you definitely see these same things. By the way, same thing works with, you want to start a cult? I've got the playbook for you, and it's very similar to this one. Echo chamber, make sure that everybody that is in that echo chamber is hearing and saying the same thing, because in propaganda, what is the single easiest way to get propaganda across? Repetition, repetition, repetition. And then get other people's repeating it to you, and you literally become hypnotized.
Yeah.
And people don't understand that this works in a lot of areas of life, not just crypto, right? That's why Ponzi was able to do social proof, man. Those early people who gave Ponzi money, they weren't lying. They
made a lot of money.
look at all the money I'm making. And they were actually like holding the money, right?
Yeah.
And so it becomes so real that it becomes so difficult for us to have strategies. If we're on our own, we're fucked, because like literally you're going to get sucked in. If you've got strategies like you're talking about, people will always say to me, well, like, how do I know when to sell? And I always gave very similar advice to yours. Just rebalance your portfolio once a year. Do it once a year.
Yeah.
If like all of a sudden you realize that stocks, you wanted it to be 60% stocks, 40% bonds, and all of a sudden the great financial crisis happens and you look at your portfolio and it's 20% stocks, 80% bonds, the thing you want to do less than, I don't know, jump off the top of the Empire State Building or set yourself on fire is to rebalance it to that 60-40 thing. But the discipline of doing that has a wonderful way of working really well with when things have overdone themselves or gone the other way.
Totally.
So I think that, simple rules that you follow can be super helpful. And I think that, like, your book is great because the first person version of it, we prefer that, we humans.
Yeah.
Like I mentioned earlier, we were entirely algorithmic. We were entirely quant, right? No emotions involved. How did I tell people about that way of investing? I told them through a series of stories. And I would begin my talk by saying, I'm going to tell you a story about why you should invest based on stories. And,
That's great.
and that seems to be what we run on. We human beings run on stories. And that's why I thought your book was such a success, because you could basically say almost everything that you've said in this book. But if you wrote it in academia, like the academics do, in a dry, dull manner, like, first off, you're not going to sell. Mom and dad might buy it. Your best friends might buy it, but that's kind of it. But they won't read it. And if they do read it, they'll just go, oh my God, like, shoot me now, man. This is so boring. And that's why I like the book and where you make it very, very real and you engage your reader. What you're doing is you're engaging the same sorts of things that happen when you get involved in those bubbles or the bust, because that type of behavior is also pretty hard to predict. What was the hardest thing for you not to put in the book?
Oh, that's a really good question. So I had to cut a number of stories that I loved, that I loved. The first one that comes to mind is actually really relevant to what you were just talking about with cults, because there was this other project that was its own huge mania within crypto called Olympus. And Olympus was actually trying to do something really, really interesting, where they were trying to create a crypto, an actual currency, something that you used for exchange, but that was based on the value of the crypto market instead of pegged to the US dollar. So, a USDC is going to be pegged to the US dollar. An Ohm token was going to be based on what the crypto market is worth, basically. So it was backed by a combination of Bitcoin and Ethereum and some stable coins and all kinds of things like that. Where it went wrong was they created a system to automatically rebase, to automatically increase the number of Ohm tokens that you had as the total value of the Olympus treasury went up. So, in the beginning, it was only based on $100 million, or it was only based on $10 million of assets backing the currency. And then it was 50, and then it was 100 million, and then it was 500 million. And so, because the amount of assets backing it was increasing, the value of a single token kind of should have been going down, because they would just print more tokens as the number of assets went up, right? Like, it's kind of a natural way to do it. So they created a system where you could leave your Ohm tokens in their app, and then your number of tokens would automatically increase as the treasury increased, right? Great. Makes sense. And then as those tokens get more valuable than the treasury, you go sell some of them into the market, and the market naturally balances the price of a token relative to the treasury. Game theoretically, all of that was pretty solid. It was a cool idea. The problem was people realized that if they just left their tokens in and didn't go to the market to sell them and, balance out against the treasury, their number of tokens would just keep going up. And if nobody was selling them, the value of them wouldn't go down. And so in the beginning, it was like, Ohm is backed by $10 million, and the market, and the market value of the market value of all the Ohm tokens was also 10 million. So, it was great. But then it quickly got to this point where there was only $100 million backing now $1 billion of token value, because nobody was selling them. And like you said, with Ponzi, and I don't think this was a Ponzi scheme, right? Like they were trying to do something cool. They just miscalculated this part in the beginning. People just kept seeing their value go up. They kept not selling, and it literally became a cult. It became, none of us sell. And people started putting 3-3 to represent the game theoretical outcome in a prisoner's dilemma of, if I don't rat on you and you don't rat on me, we both walk free. Well, if I don't sell and you don't sell, we both become rich. Obviously, that's absurd because somebody has to sell eventually. But everybody held on long enough for it to go to like 300 billion in treasury assets, but a 4 billion token value. And so there was only like 10% of the token value actually backing it. But at the peak, everyone thought this is going to 10 billion. I thought it was going to 10 billion. I was so convinced. I had put in 10,000. It had run up to over 100,000 between, the token price going up and my number of tokens compounding. And everybody was just so bought in and excited. And I rode that all the way back down. A lot of other people did. And that was such a perfect story to capture this idea that if something going up is becoming part of a person's identity, because people were putting Ohm in their Twitter bios, they were putting 3-3 in brackets in their name on Twitter to show they were part of the Ohm cult, that was the time to sell, because that was a sign that it had gone long past any real fundamental value and was now just this pure mania, obsessive, cultish. Everybody had drank the Kool-Aid, and that was a big red flag. But, I was fully bought in on it. I had an article that I wrote pretty close to the peak saying I was wrong about Olympus, and here's what they're trying to do, and it's actually really cool. And yes, it's overvalued, but it should stabilize over time. And I should have just sold it then. I should have been more emphatic in warning that it was just way overvalued. And the other big cult that I didn't get to talk about as much, but that I wish I could have talked about more, was Terra Luna. You mentioned earlier that I'd made money on Terra, but that was actually this earlier project called Iron that was trying to do a really similar thing to Terra. I ended up losing money on Terra, but the thing that I didn't lose money on with Terra was the stablecoin. And their stablecoin was the one that was compounding at a fixed 20% interest rate. And it was, that was the worst failure of the whole mania, because that wiped out it was $20 billion of the stablecoin went to zero basically in the course of a week. And all the way up, everybody was getting that 20% fixed APR every day. You could just log in and you could see, I've just gotten more free money and let it stay in. And it just kept compounding, and everyone thought it was going up forever. And the founder was just an asshole. He was so like mean and yelling at people on Twitter and calling them rude names. And everybody was so bought into his hype. They were like, he's like the next Steve Jobs. He's like the next Elon. He's a hard charging entrepreneur who won't take any doubters. And they would pile in on his tweets. If anybody doubted them, they would, attack anybody who questioned it. And that was a sign. That was a sign that there is not enough fundamental value here to believe in. You have to rely on this like anger, on this cult-like behavior. And so when you see a cult as the main backing unit of a currency instead of, a powerful military, that's maybe a sign that there's just not enough here to actually rely on. Like a great counter to that is this app on Ethereum called MakerDAO, which is the one that I used when I needed to borrow money to pay for my car. And Maker has been quietly running on Ethereum since 2018, 19, a long time, never had any failures, has hundreds of millions of, actually billions of dollars deposited in it. People are borrowing hundreds of millions or billions of dollars against those assets. Nobody is picking fights over MakerDAO on Twitter. It's just working. It's just doing its job in the background very reliably. Nobody's really worried about it anymore. It's been sufficiently de-risked. And like, that's something that you should feel pretty safe using as crypto things go. But if you see something in this coming cycle over the next couple of years where the founder is this bombastic asshole on Twitter and people are putting the name of the project in their Twitter bios and, starting fights over it and saying, yeah, if you get in, you're going to make all this money, like get out, just sell, right? Because that's a sign that you're getting pretty close to the edge. You want like boring, unsexy things, even in crypto, right? Like Bitcoin is boring and unsexy, right? I mean, it's sexy in a way, but compared to whatever the new crazy hype thing is, it's comparatively boring. But if you just put your money into Bitcoin and don't go chasing the hot new thing, 90% of the time you're probably going to do better because you're not going to get caught up in whatever the new mania or cult is. So cults are a pretty good counter signal for investing too. And I wish I could have included the Ohm story, but it was like explaining the technicality was slowing people down, and I was getting into the real action around the token price of the game going up, and it was like, okay, this has to go just to make the whole story a little bit tighter.
Yeah, those are two great ones. And as I was reading your book, I just kept looking at like old notes that I'd made about various schemes, and there is definitely a playbook, right? Like one of the oldest schemes on Wall Street, when you still had to use snail mail, right, was a guy would do 10,000, right? And he would buy the mailing addresses, and he would send letters, actual physical letters to people.
Oh,
touting his stock picking and market timing genius. He was the best of all the prognosticators and prophets, except 5,000 got his email or his newsletter pitch saying, and by the way, next month the market will go up. And then the other 5,000 got, by the way, the market will go down. And then if the market went up, he only went back to that 5,000 and just kept doing it. And then he got down to his real marks, which were the people who had received 12 letters in a row over a year in which every prediction he made was correct.
Yeah.
That is almost impossible for a regular human to just go, this guy really is magic. He really does have a system.
Proof is right there. Yeah.
Proof is right there. Yeah, it's amazing. Well, what's next for you? What are you working on now?
I'm working on a sci-fi novel, actually. So
wonderful.
Yeah, writing Crypto Confidential was such a journey because I'd always been a how-to self-help / philosophical essay writer online. And then I got into this, and I pretty quickly realized that a how-to nonfiction book was going to be boring for some of the reasons we talked about. And I said, I have to learn how to write something really fun and exciting. And I had no idea how to do that. And so I started reading more like thriller fiction. I studied like how John Grisham writes, and I was reading like sci-fi fantasy too, to see, okay, how do you make something really fun and exciting? And I started reading all these books on fiction writing because I wanted it to read like a novel. I wanted it to have that energy to it. And the more I got into studying fiction writing and applying it to telling this story, I just kept thinking, this is really fun. I'm really, really enjoying this. And there were all of these points in the story where I started thinking, if this other thing happened, it would actually be a better story, right? Like if this had gone much worse or had gone much better, or this other character thing had happened, that would actually be a cooler story. And so when I turned in the book last October, I said, okay, I have this idea for a sci-fi novel. I'm just going to take my daily routine that I was applying to Crypto Confidential and apply it to this novel and try to write a first draft. And 2.5 months later, I had a whole first draft done, and I had so much fun doing it. And I started thinking, man, this is great. Like, this would be such a fun career to do nonfiction books when I feel like I have something worth saying. I didn't want to get stuck in feeling like I have to put out a nonfiction book every year or two to like pay my bill, because then I might, do topics I'm less passionate about. But with fiction, I just sort of have infinite ideas for cool stories I could tell. And so I finished that first draft and I said, this is what I want to do next. And so I sat on it for a bit, and then I got a second draft done, and I've had that out to people for feedback the last couple of weeks. And now I'm starting to get into applying the feedback. But man, I'm really excited to get back to work on that after this kind of promo tour is done. And my goal is to either get a good book deal for it by the end of the year, or find out that I can't get a good enough book deal and start figuring out how I want to self-publish it. because I'd be pretty open to self-publishing for fiction. It's a very different industry than nonfiction, or doing, something like what you guys are doing, where like one of these new hybrid publishers, something in between the two. Because man, I love doing it. It's so fun. There's so much of what I've been writing about in the past that, like we were saying, I think does better in a story than a checklist or than a 2,000 word piece of advice. And I would love to have that kind of author career where I just flow back and forth between these two kinds of writings. So I'm super excited about that. It's been really, really fun, and I can't wait to see where it goes.
Very cool. And my team at Infinite Books would play me alive if I didn't say, "Hey, Nat, let's see a manuscript. Might be interested in that. We'd
100%. Yeah. I'd love to show it to you guys. I mean, I've known Jimmy forever too. So,
well, there you go.
Yeah,
I mean,
it would be fun to work together.
That would be a lot of fun. Well, this has been absolutely, really as much fun as I thought it was going to be. I loved your book. I recommend everyone read it. Can't wait to take a look at your science fiction.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be really cool. If you've listened to us in the past, you do know that our final question is always, we're going to make you the emperor of the world. And you can't put anyone in a re-education camp, and you can't kill anybody. But what we are going to do is we're going to hand you a magical microphone, and you can speak two things into it. And what will happen is everyone on the planet will wake up whenever their next morning is, and you will have incepted them with those two ideas. And they're going to say, I just had two of the best ideas in the world. And unlike all the other times, I'm going to start acting on both of these right now. What are you going to incept in the world's population?
The first one is definitely that it is worth, the short version of it would be dedicate the time to know yourself. Because if you have as good of a sense as you can have about what you want in life, or who you are, what your strengths and weaknesses are, what's true for you versus what's been put on you, so many other decisions become easier and become clearer. And we've talked about, mimetic influences and the earlier and all of this stuff. And so much of that becomes at least a little bit less effective if you have that strong core that you can return to. And that, in terms of things that couldn't make it into the book, that was like a really, really challenging process for me coming out of this. And in writing this, it was like really, really hard a lot of times, and kind of realizing that I didn't have good answers to a lot of those. And some of the clarity that's given my life afterwards has been incredibly rewarding. So, that would be the first one, is take the time to really try to know yourself. And the second one, and this is one of the oldest ideas there is, so it's certainly not original, but that this moment really is all there is. If you're doing everything for some future time period, or always entombed in some past time period, then you're never really living. And I think children have been such a blessing for starting to realize this more in my life and going through this whole experience. And so I think if you can take the time to really know yourself and recognize that the moment that you're living right now, really, that's it. A lot of other stuff falls into place, or it starts to sort itself out, or becomes a little bit easier to handle. And I would hope that could help a lot of other people too, the way it's helped me.
Those are both great ones. The first one reminds me of an old Wall Street saying, which was, if you don't know who you are, the stock market is a very expensive place to find out.
It's so applicable. Yeah.
And then, of course, the second one is living in the now. It sounds easy, and boy, is it not easy. It's really, really hard.
So hard.
But if you can, life becomes quite a bit better. Nat, this has been absolutely a pleasure. I wish you great success with the book. And we will definitely have you back on again after it's out. And You see how you do with both the slings and arrows and with the massive amounts of praise.
Thanks, Jim. This was super, super fun. I loved chatting today. And yeah, I'm excited to chat more in the future, maybe show you the sci-fi novel. And
would love to see it.
Yeah, keep up the great work.
All right. Cheers. Thanks, Nat.